All right, imagine this. The Supreme Court drops a bombshell affirmative action. Decades-long experiment in socially engineered college admissions is officially over. The dust hasn't even settled, and already the dominoes are falling. MIT, one of the most prestigious schools on the planet, sees its Black and Latino enrollment plummet, while Asian numbers shoot through the roof. And guess what? White enrollment? Steady as a rock. It's like watching a game of musical chairs, but the music is meritocracy. And some people didn't get the memo to dance faster. We're about to unpack what's happening here, why Asians are thriving, why some groups are struggling, and what this says about the messy intersection of education, race, and the great American myth of equal opportunity. Oh, and yes, we'll touch on the spicy debates this sparked online because, let's face it, people love to share their hot takes. Affirmative action in a nutshell. So let's talk about affirmative action, this wonderfully divisive policy that's been the cornerstone of college admissions for decades. On paper, it's all about leveling the playing field. You know, giving a boost to underrepresented groups who've historically had the odds stacked against them. Sounds noble, right? Well, the reality is a bit more complicated. For years, affirmative action has been criticized as the academic equivalent of handing out participation trophies. Sorry, you didn't win the race, but here's a spot in an Ivy League school for effort. And the Supreme Court finally said, nah, enough of that. The ruling made one thing clear. Admission should be based on your achievements, not the boxes you tick on an application. But here's where it gets messy. The moment you strip away racial preferences, you start to see who was really benefiting and who wasn't. Turns out, a lot of Asian students were getting shafted, passed over in favor of others with, let's just say, less competitive resumes. And now, with the training wheels off, it's like watching Usain Bolt race toddlers. No contest. Affirmative action was never just about fairness. It was about optics. Institutions wanted to look diverse, but behind the curtain, it was all a numbers game. Now, with the rules rewritten, the numbers are doing the talking, and they've got a lot to say. MIT's enrollment changes, the numbers. All right, now let's dive into the juicy data. Numbers don't lie, right? Well, unless you're a college admissions office trying to balance diversity and merit without spilling your coffee. Here's the breakdown for MIT's incoming class after the Supreme Court's ruling. Black student enrollment are down from 13% to 5%. That's a steep drop, like someone pulled the rug out. Hispanic enrollment, not far behind, dropping from 15% to 11%. And Asian students, oh, they're thriving, jumping from 41% to 47%. That's nearly half the class. White students, rock solid at 37%, because why mess with a winning formula? Let's be honest, this isn't just a statistical shift. It's a cultural earthquake. For years, we were told that diversity quotas were the price of fairness. But now, with the playing field supposedly leveled, the results are speaking for themselves. Asian students are shining because, let's face it, they've been grinding in overdrive for decades. Tutors, SAT prep, extracurriculars, you name it. It's not magic, it's work ethic. But before you whip out the party hats, let's not ignore the flip side. What about the groups who lost seats? Are we just replacing one imbalance with another? These numbers are more than stats, they're stories. Stories of who wins, who loses, and who gets left, wondering if the game was ever fair to begin with. The cultural shift, winners and losers. So let's talk about what these numbers actually mean, because this isn't just a spreadsheet shuffle. This is a cultural shift with clear winners and losers. And spoiler alert, not everyone's walking away happy. The big winners here, Asian students. And honestly, can you blame them? For years, they've been the punching bag of the admissions process, carrying the so-called model minority badge like a medal and a burden. Despite being penalized for overachieving, yes, you heard that right, they just kept grinding. Tutors, test scores, extracurriculars, they treated the college admissions game like an Olympic sport. Now, with affirmative action gone, they're finally getting a shot at the podium. A 6% jump in enrollment, that's not just a win, that's a statement. But let's not ignore the flip side. The losers in this cultural shakeup are painfully obvious. Black and Latino students who saw their numbers drop like a bad stock market day. And it's not just a statistic, it's a stark reminder of how much these communities relied on affirmative action to level the playing field. With that safety net gone, they're up against a system that rewards preparation and resources, things that aren't exactly handed out evenly in America. And the steady whites? Yeah, they're just cruising along, sipping their legacy admissions privileges while everyone else fights over the scraps. let's not pretend the system isn't still rigged in some ways. This is where things get uncomfortable. Was affirmative action a flawed solution to a real problem? Sure. But what's the alternative? Because right now, it looks like a meritocracy that isn't as fair as it pretends to be. And as the dust settles, the question isn't just who's winning or losing, it's whether the game itself is worth playing. The Asian model minority myth, a double-edged sword. All right, now let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say the tiger in the classroom, the infamous model minority myth. You know, the idea that Asians are naturally destined to excel at everything from calculus to violin concertos while barely breaking a sweat? Sounds flattering, right? Wrong. This stereotype is as much a trap as it is a trophy. Here's the deal. For decades, this myth has been weaponized. On one hand, it's held up as proof that hard work always pays off. Look at those Asian students, thriving in a system that supposedly doesn't care about race. But on the other hand, it's been used to justify systemic discrimination. Colleges turned it into a quota game, saying, we've already got enough Asians. Let's give someone else a shot. Translation, merit be damned. And now, with affirmative action gone, Asians are suddenly seen as the villains in this story, accused of taking spots away from other minorities. It's the same old game, just with a new scapegoat. And let's not forget, not all Asian communities are thriving. Southeast Asian groups like the Hmong and Cambodians face massive socioeconomic hurdles. But they get lumped into the same model minority box as the kids with perfect SAT scores. Fair? Not so much. This myth isn't just a stereotype, it's a divide and conquer tactic. It pits minorities against each other while the real beneficiaries of the system looking at you. Legacy admissions keep flying under the radar, so let's call this what it is, a distraction. A way to keep us squabbling over scraps while the real power players keep the whole pie. Legacy admissions, the real affirmative action. Now, let's talk about the golden ticket nobody likes to mention. Legacy admissions. You know, the real affirmative action that quietly keeps the doors open for the kids of donors, alumni, and anyone whose last name graces a campus building. Forget merit, this is the VIP line, where the cover charge is a trust fund and your grandpa's name on a wing of the library. While everyone's busy debating affirmative action for underrepresented minorities, legacy admissions just keeps cruising under the radar. And get this, legacy students make up anywhere from 10% to 25% of incoming classes at elite schools. That's right. The same institutions crying about diversity are also rolling out the red carpet for kids who barely need a resume because daddy went here. And let's not pretend this is harmless. Legacy admissions disproportionately benefit wealthy white families. So while Asian, Black, and Latino students are duking it out in the meritocracy Hunger Games, legacies are waltzing in with a wink and a handshake. It's the ultimate plot twist. The system that claims to reward excellence quietly props up privilege. But here's the kicker, nobody's really fighting this. Why? Because legacy admissions are baked into the business model. Universities need donations, and nothing loosens the purse strings faster than guaranteeing little Johnny a spot in the freshman class. It's a racket, plain and simple. So before we go patting ourselves on the back for ending affirmative action, maybe we should ask, why does this other, even less meritocratic system still get a free pass? The backlash. What's next for Asians? So here's the thing about shaking up a system. Someone's always going to push back. And when it comes to this new meritocracy post-affirmative action, the backlash is already brewing. Spoiler alert, Asians might be the next target. Let's face it, people aren't thrilled about Asians dominating college admissions. The model minority myth we just talked about, it's starting to wear thin. Suddenly, success looks like selfishness. Oh, those Asians, they're taking all the spots. Really? Taking spots? As if there's a finite number of opportunities and fairness means handing out participation trophies to make everyone feel better. But the reality is darker. With more Asian students getting into top schools, resentment is simmering. The whispers of they're too successful are getting louder. And don't think this is limited to Reddit debates or dinner table conversations. Anti-Asian hate crimes, yeah, those numbers are real and they're not pretty. Success doesn't always earn you applause, it often makes you a target. And let's not forget the political opportunists who are itching to spin this narrative. Some are already saying, see, this is why we need affirmative action back. You can almost hear the gears turning. Blame Asians for breaking the system and use it as an excuse to bring back the very thing that penalized them. So what's next? More lawsuits, more protests, or maybe just a society that doubles down on division? One thing's for sure, this story is far from over. And Asians are smack in the middle of it, whether they want to be or not. Meritocracy versus equity. the never-ending debate. All right, let's unpack the big question here, meritocracy or equity. Which one is the hill we're supposed to die on? Because apparently you can't have both without everyone losing their minds. Meritocracy, the idea that the best, brightest, and hardest working should rise to the top. Sounds great, right? But here's the rub. Meritocracy assumes a level playing field. And spoiler alert, America's playing field is about as level as a skate park. Some kids are starting life with private tutors, while others are trying to do algebra on a busted Chromebook with dial-up Wi-Fi. Not exactly a fair fight. Then there's equity. It's supposed to bridge the gap to give those at the bottom a leg up. But here's the thing, when you prioritize equity, merit often takes a backseat, and that's where things get messy. How do you balance rewarding hard work with addressing systemic inequalities? Turns out nobody has a good answer, just a lot of opinions. Take MIT's new numbers. Asians dominating the admissions pool, that's meritocracy in action. But the sharp drop in Black and Latino students, that's equity taking the hit, and everyone's got their spin. Some are cheering for the triumph of fairness, while others are mourning the loss of diversity. Both sides are yelling, and nobody's listening. But here's the kicker. This isn't a new debate. It's the same argument we've been having for decades, just with different players and a fresh coat of paint. The truth? Meritocracy and equity aren't enemies. They're just two sides of the same flawed coin. And the real question isn't which one's better, it's why we're still pretending the coin isn't rigged in the first place. The fallout. What this means for America's future. So, where does this leave us? The numbers are out, the debates are raging, and the fallout is only just beginning. But let's zoom out for a second, because this is bigger than just MIT or any one school. This is about the future of America's so-called elite institutions, and let's be honest, the future of the country itself. With affirmative action gone, we're doubling down on the idea of a merit-based system. But here's the catch. When you strip everything down to raw competition, the cracks in the system start to show. Public education, still a mess. Economic inequality, wider than ever. And cultural biases, alive and kicking. Without serious reform, meritocracy is just a nice word we slap on a very uneven playing field. And what about diversity? It's not just a buzzword for feel-good brochures, it's about preparing students to thrive in a globalized world. If America's top schools become dominated by one or two demographics, how does that affect the broader society? Do we end up with an even more divided nation where educational success creates silos instead of bridges? But let's not ignore the flip side. The collapse of affirmative action has exposed some hard truths, like the fact that not all attempts at fairness are actually fair. Legacy admissions, underfunded schools, and deeply ingrained biases have been lurking in the shadows for decades. Maybe this is the wake-up call we needed to start fixing the system from the ground up. The question is, do we have the guts to actually do it? Or are we just going to keep arguing over who's winning and who's losing while the real problems stay exactly where they are? One thing's for sure, the fallout from this decision is going to shape America for years to come. Buckle up, because this ride is far from over. The final verdict, who wins, who loses, and what we've learned. All right, let's bring this home. So, who are the real winners and losers in this post-affirmative action world? Well, it depends on who you ask. For Asian students, it's a win, but a bittersweet one. Sure, the numbers are up, but with it comes a target on their backs. They've gone from being overlooked to being overanalyzed, praised for their work ethic, while quietly resented for their success. It's like winning the game only to find out the prize is more scrutiny. For Black and Latino students, it's a tough loss. The decline in their numbers isn't just about stats, it's about lost opportunities and the harsh reality of systemic inequality. Affirmative action wasn't perfect, but for many it was a lifeline, a flawed one maybe, but a lifeline nonetheless. And then there are the steady white students cruising along without a care in the world. Legacy admissions are still their golden parachute, keeping the gates open for the privileged few while everyone else battles it out below. But here's the kicker. Nobody really wins in a system that's broken at its core. The debates over affirmative action, meritocracy, and equity, they're just symptoms of a much bigger problem, a society that loves the idea of fairness but hates doing the hard work to achieve it. So, what have we learned? Maybe that the rules of the game are changing, but the game itself, still rigged. The Supreme Court's decision is a turning point, sure, but it's not the end of the story. It's just the start of a new chapter, one that's bound to be just as messy, divisive, and let's be honest, entertaining as the last. And as we step into this brave new world, one thing's clear, the fight for fairness isn't over, it's just getting started. Closing thoughts, the bigger picture. All right, let's step back for a second. This whole debate, affirmative action, meritocracy, legacy admissions, diversity, it's not just about college campuses. It's a mirror reflecting the broader struggles in our society. Who gets a seat at the table? Who gets left out? And who decides the rules of the game? The Supreme Court's decision didn't solve these questions, it just reshuffled the deck. For some, this feels like justice restored. For others, it's a step backward. But here's the thing, this isn't just a policy debate, it's a reckoning, a moment to ask ourselves what kind of society we want to build. Do we want a system where hard work and talent are rewarded regardless of your background? Or are we okay with a rigged game that props up privilege and leaves everyone else fighting over scraps? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have easy answers. But they're questions we need to keep asking, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about who gets into MIT. It's about what happens when they get there. It's about the kind of world they'll step into after graduation, the one we're all building piece by piece. So yeah, the numbers are important, the debates are heated, and the stakes are high, but let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. The real battle isn't just over admissions, it's over what we value as a society, and that's a fight worth having.